So let us continue and welcome to those of you who follow this online. If you didn't listen before, we had a keynote speech by the new Zennström professor, Sverker Jagers, and we are now following up with a panel. My name is Mikael Karlsson. I'm head of climate change leadership research unit here, associate professor in environmental science and climate change leadership. And we have a panel coming from research institutions. Naghmeh Nasiritousi, who is associate professor of political science at Stockholm University, focusing on, among other things, climate policy issues. And then we have, let's call it two representatives from civil society, but from Churches of Sweden is name, Annika, who is environmental specialist, you can call yourself there, working with sustainability issues. And then we have Eva from, who will in February, I think, start as CEO or head of the organization Global Utmaning, which is a civil society organization, but you also have a background in Miljöpartiet. You were state secretary in the environment ministry previously, working on climate issue. And Mattias, who is head of public affairs at Volvo Cars, and who also has a background in politics as head of the staff of the previous government, together with Andreas Carlgren when he was environment minister. And Lina, yes. So I think it's excellent to have these four different perspectives, or perhaps even more perspectives on the issues we're talking about today. And I would like to invite you in the panel to start and, well, reflect, think, comment, question, criticize, applaud what Sverker was talking about before. So Naghmeh.
Thank you very much. So thank you for having me on this panel. Very nice to listen to you, Sverker. So congratulations on this very important position. And also congratulations to the Zennström professorship for choosing a political scientist. Because as a political scientist, I think this is the key for understanding the climate problem. And as you said, climate leadership is key and political leadership is key. But as someone who was asked to comment on climate leadership, commenting on the different political parties' positions before the election, I'm disappointed to say that climate leadership was not very visible. It was in short supply. Only a few political parties even demonstrated some sort of climate leadership. So while I applaud your presentation and I fully agree that we need this kind of top-down steering to help us with the different trade-offs and difficulties in navigating this transformation that we're going through, I was lacking a little bit of discussion on what is climate leadership and how do we get it, because it is missing from much of the world, unfortunately. There are great examples, of course, of climate leadership, and you had some on your screen. But I think we need to tease out a bit more both how research could help in identifying climate leadership, but also how academic institutions can reach out more to society. Because you did mention inertia, and as someone working at a big university, I can tell you there's much inertia also in the academic world. And unfortunately, we're not reaching out with our research findings the way we should.
Thank you, Naghmeh. Annika.
And also, again, thank you for having me on this panel. And again, congratulations also on the professorship. I got some reflections. As Church of Sweden, I think that we, as a church, I think that we have an important role in talking about values, but also talking about values in a way that's that matters to people. And I think maybe that could also help, talking about fairness and talking about justice and kind of upholding values. But also as a church, we have many buildings, we have many churchyards. So we could, in terms of those actors that you listed on one of your last slides, that's relevant for us. And in terms of research on climate leadership, I think that it's to really help move things forward. I think that collaboration and co-creation is really important. And I was going to talk about, in my preparations for today, I was going to mention a competence center for solar research. That I think is a good example. And incidentally, the leader of that research, that competence center, is here, Marika. But I think that it takes on board both several universities and research institutes. It takes on board regions and municipalities. It takes on board suppliers from different sectors. It goes all the way back to materials research. And perhaps Church of Sweden, we're also a partner of this. We are perhaps the kind of at the application side. So in order to really apply social science, I think that this kind of competence center and collaboration and co-creation is really important. And then we have lots of different actors there. And I think that's a quick way to hopefully apply social science. And also one of the good things about that is that since it's a competence center and not just a single project, with all the partners can actually ask, we can have input in what projects, how they are going to be formulated. So that means that we're a part of it along the way. So applied science, science and social science, and collaboration between science and social science, and involvement of different actors, I think is really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Eva?
Thank you. Is this on? Okay, thank you. And thank you for having this panel and for inviting us to discuss these very interesting and important issues. And also congratulations to you, Sverker. It was also very interesting to listen to you talking about very broad issues and also hard to understand. But I would like to pick up on some things that you said. You were talking about different kinds of leaderships, and I think maybe the most important one would be the political leadership in if you compare it with the individual leadership, not as consumers, but as citizens. Somewhere in between there, we could maybe create and have applying social sciences to be able to move forward. I have a hard time seeing that business or civil society as one actor could be able to change or to be the engine for us moving forward. They could put pressure, but without the political leadership, we're not going anywhere, I think. And then I also got stuck with this fluff in the washing machine. You saying that it's easier to let it stay there than to write an angry note. But we need to be able to understand why it is like that, because it could be as easy to write an angry note, and everyone could leave an angry note. Then maybe we should move. That is I understand that's the collective action, but how and what is the self-interest and the guarantees that we want to have? What kind of guarantees? Could that be taking responsibility for coming generations, or could that be some kind of understanding of solidarity or common values? I would like to hear you elaborate a bit more about the information deficit, because that could, in my understanding, I think there is some kind of information deficit if we understand it as common understanding or knowledge or knowledge that we co-create or make create together, because I think that's what we need. and maybe there's not the awareness might not be as high as we want it to be when you get down to the layers within the population. One comparison that I often think of is the anti-spanking law that we have in Sweden since 1979. Then we succeeded in changing behavior. That was a common understanding that you do you use violence or corporal punishment when you guide your children. Now we don't. Now we have a common understanding that that's what you should not do. And what actually changed, that was a lot of information and a lot of awareness raising, and also a lot of children witnessing how they were affected by their parents using violence against them, so that we really understood, and then we could also change our behavior. So I hope that we still have a way to go for us to have a common understanding how this is going to affect us, or how it's already affecting us, to be able to go forward in a collective way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You before, Mattias, you mentioned this fluff in the dryer. I think it's interesting. Let's make a social experiment here. Anyone who picks it out and is cleaning the dryer, please raise your hand. I'll see. Do you pick out this fluff from the dryer after washing? After washing. And who of you are not doing it? A few, yeah. I don't have a dryer because it consumes electricity. So anyway, Mattias.
Thank you so very much for being here. It's really an honor, and congratulations also, of course, to this appointment of yours. I was a bit late coming here, which was in itself a factor of the climate, I would say. But even so, I got to hear at least a bit of this. Two things that, I mean, you can discuss this, of course, for a long time. But two things that struck me was that leadership is always a bit tricky to define. I would say, because it's a bit like the Margaret Thatcher quote that either you are a lady, or you should not had to be told that you are a lady. You should more like act like you're a lady, basically. And I guess it's the same thing with leadership, that it could also be a bit tricky to define who is actually a leader and who is not, and what is sort of what are the factors behind that. And another thing that struck me when you had your various sort of groups, I mean, you probably have checked on other groups as well, the ones to sort of show climate leadership, as you said. I kind of missed out the money, where the financial sectors, because, for instance, my own company, what we are doing now, which I'm happy to elaborate perhaps more later on, is that we're not philanthropists. We do this to earn money on what we're doing. But on the other hand, to make this transition also is what we do, because this is also what we are being asked by our investors, and also not least by our customers, to go in this direction, to how they respond to this. And it struck me when we were engaged in other things, Mikael, back in the days when we went on COPs together. I was at the COP in Cancun, COP 16, I calculated, it was some time ago. And that was the first COP after the big COP in Copenhagen. That was interesting to be there, because they were then discussing how to actually, what are we going to do with the Copenhagen, was Accord, it was called. And then I went on this lecture with OECD, and there, now I think he's resigned, but he was almost then already legendary, the Secretary General Angel Guerilla, and his chief economist Simon Upton, who had this very, very interesting presentation, where they showed basically on the division between North and South in the world, and how money was flowing. And then Simon Upton stopped all of a sudden, because he was pointing towards how government could, through, for instance, aid, support various climate policies in the developing world. But then he stopped all of a sudden. But hey, make no mistake, he said, public spending will always be dwarfed by private money. And then he showed how much in terms of fossil subsidies and how much money was actually being spent on various less climate-friendly industrial policies was coming from the private sector. And believe me, the public spending was dwarfed. But it's the other way around, I would say now, in terms of how we also have opportunities through the financial sectors and the financial systems. So that would be also interesting to see how that could be featured in, because that's certainly for us as a private company a defining factor, how our investors respond and what we're being asked to do by our customers. Thanks.
Thank you. I had wanted to ask you now what you want to sort of get out of science, how science and research and scientists can help you, but some of you have already responded to that, but perhaps maybe, and maybe you're a scientist yourself, but if anyone wants to add anything on that, what I mean, Sverker will be here, and I mean, most of us here do research. What is needed in society? Is research a bottleneck, a lack of scientific insights a bottleneck for you in your respective organizations to move ahead on these issues? What do you need to know more? Because if you think that what we do here is to produce knowledge, and Naghmeh, you can of course also comment on what you think is most suitable to present, but let's the others, perhaps Annika start first.
Well, I think that the tricky thing is accessing the knowledge, but that may not be so difficult. But I don't know the proper English word, but the third task for the universities is really important, but perhaps even more co-creation. But then the problem is, how do we take it and do something with it? So much, not so much the lack of knowledge, but actually doing something with it. And many years ago, when I was in research myself and was supposed to present some policy message, I found that I was expected to present maybe a few bullet points, and that the recipient pretty much expected to just be able to take those bullet points, apply those regardless of context. And I thought, well, it really depends, at least to some extent. So to actually help us understand the contextual factors that we have to consider when we try to apply the knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Eva?
I heard what you said, and I saw also the question mark between after the activist under science, but I still think that we need to work closer together. We need to work together from the beginning to have, when it comes to legitimacy, the input, creating the knowledge and the common knowledge together from the beginning, and there after that you get output legitimacy, where we have the effective or cost-effective and fair transformative strategies and policies. But I think the lack is at the beginning, where we need to take a step towards each other from politicians or policies to science, and to bridge over the gap and to create a common knowledge from the beginning.
Thank you. Mattias, do you need any help from research in Volvo Cars?
No, not at all. No.
Oh, okay.
Certainly we do, and do all the time, I would say. And I guess also now with it could sound a bit far-reaching, but we think we have a pretty good grip on our pathway towards carbon neutrality in 2040 these days, and we're going to be fully electrified with our products until 2030 and so forth. The tricky thing for us now is to also implement the circular economy aspect, because that's almost, I would say, as important, but it's sort of, it all goes together in that sense. But because this is also an area where we see very little is being made in terms of calculations for instance, on which we need to base our business models for this. So science and research, I think, is a great help of us in our partnerships and our own R&D department also to support us in this task, because we need to figure out what to base the models on, how to make the right calculations and measurements, and also to sort of be in line with other, and not least also the scientific targets that we can, science-based targets that has been worked on as an international tool, because there are so many, as you know, there is little of harmonization in terms of what you, in addition to, of course, laws and regulations, but it is also somewhat tricky to find one common tool to use or to make use of. We need several tools at the same time to define, in our case, then circular economy, and to also take care of the aftermarket and how to treat car batteries downstream. Actually, it would be the greatest task we face at the moment for electrified cars. So we certainly see, in terms of models, calculations, and what to base these measurements on, we rely a lot on science research already, and will do increasingly so.
Thank you. Naghmeh, you want to reflect on these sort of calls or asks from science? You're in the political science field, of course, but a reflection?
Yeah, I think the calls for co-production and more knowledge sharing, and also what you said about applied science, I think that needs to be valued a lot more at universities. At the moment, taking the time to speak to the public or societal actors, it's not valued, and it's not something that you're benefiting from as a researcher. And I think that's one explanation for why you didn't find so many cases of applied science, but I think that's our homework to do. But then also, how can science be developed to also ask these questions about how do we find the solutions? That needs to be much more prominent, I think, because time is short, and I think there is a lot of knowledge out there, but it needs to come together. And so it's not just the universities that sit on this knowledge, but we need to work together with other actors.
Thank you. So I would like to ask, before we open up for questions and comments, and eventually also for Sverker's feedback, but how do you shoulder climate leadership in your organizations, in the role you're having? Mattias, what's the role of Volvo Cars in this context? Do you feel
well?
Are you a climate leader?
I don't think I have any representatives from any competitor here now, so I think I speak freely. But we had actually a case now when the EU was going to set the new targets for or CO2 targets for the car industry, for car makers. We were actually involved in a quite lengthy debate on the European level, because we were actually we were the only European car maker saying out loud that we wanted a target to be set for when there would be only would be allowed to sell and market zero emission vehicles in Europe. And our vision for that, we started I think 2 years ago and took that position in these discussions. And the reason why we did that was we also that we said that no matter that you have various initiatives or incentives individually in European countries to steer the market in various directions, it would be much better to have one overarching goal for everyone, not only the private sector but also the public sector, so everybody knows what's actually going to happen, because then every actor will work and every sector will work in that direction, and that in itself would make this progression to be much more efficient. And we were actually the only, as I said, the only car maker saying that from the beginning. A couple of the others sort of joined this cause 1.5 years ago when we also during these discussions. And I think it's fair to say that I'm proud to say that we were actually appointed by the European NGO Transport and Environment to be actually a climate leader amongst the European car makers, because we had been consistent.
Is this a new role for Volvo Cars? So when you were politicians, was this what Volvo Cars called you for? Or?
Not really. This is certainly.
You don't need to go into the details.
But again, I mean, that's also where you see that what our company has, or where the company has chosen to what we have chosen to do. Not least, again, I need really to stress this, that this has been very much a request from our customers to go in this direction, to produce only electrified vehicles. And in that sense, I think it's also interesting to see that this is also now what actually became just, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the last document was signed between the EU institutions that now we have 2035 target zero emission vehicles only. And I did take note that we still have a couple of CEOs from other European car makers, especially German ones, saying that this is really, really bad for the car industry, whereas we have been saying all along that this is actually good for the car industry. This is how we should develop and become more competitive versus the other regions.
I mean, isn't it a kind of dialectic relationship between, you say you do what your customers want, but at the same time in advertisement and so on, you also tell them what to ask?
You mean tell them what to ask?
Yeah, but I mean, you can choose what you advertise. You can choose what you speak for as a company in relation to politicians. And I mean, we had this question before about the depletion of ozone layer and international diplomacy, where we went from a kind of vicious circle to a very positive development, where scientists showed that political action wasn't feasible and companies were pushing for politicians to ask for higher standards. So you had a very positive.
But actually, in terms of electrification, I must say, coming from back in the days from the political sector myself, that I would say that the political sector, they are actually, the politicians are behind in terms of where we are going with this. And we see that many regulations, again, the tax incentive scheme for sure, but also other regulations are actually a bit behind in terms of what kind of products we offer, and again, what kind of products the customers ask for. And if you just look at Sweden, which in terms of cars and car making are really far ahead in having an electrified car fleet now. It is certainly not due to the fact that it's public procurement that has steered this. It's certainly not company cars, because they are really, really hesitant in investing this. This is actually private individuals, private customers they are the ones asking to buy these cars and to go in this direction. So it's also a matter of yes, we of course we take into account what politicians are saying and where regulations steering us. We have to, because otherwise we would be paying fines or in that sense. But it is also very to stay competitive and for us being a relatively not even small minor car maker in the global perspective, we have like 1.5% of the whole global car market. But also to sort of preserve that position, we also need to take bold decisions, we think.
Yeah.
And in our case, it is.
What I meant with sort of educating your consumers or customers is, if you take grocery stores and can decide to sort of hide the organic potato on the shelf at the floor, or they can say, this is where we have sale prices and you can meet them up front in the store. So, I mean, it's also a company attitude. It's an active choice you have made.
You can always discuss the responsibility, be it for the private sector, be it for researchers, or be it for politicians. But I mean, and again, as I said, I'm not going to pretend. I mean, we're not philanthropists. As I said, we're a private company. We also need to, of course, not only are we to do what the investors told us, we also have to show them that we earn money for them. So certainly that is part of the puzzle.
Yeah. Eva, how do you shoulder climate leadership or leadership in these issues in Global Utmaning?
From Global Utmaning is a think tank, and the way we can act is as being part of the civil society and also being independent. We can, in that sense, offer an arena for dialoguing and a meeting point. We can collect people from science, from business, from other civil society organizations, and also being closer to citizens. I think that's one of the most important things that civil society can do, and that's where they have their legitimacy. They are close to citizens, and therefore they can bridge over from citizens and towards to politicians. And I would say again what I've already said: the co-creation of knowledge. There we also have being relevant in that area of creating new knowledge and new understandings. We need other actors than only science or only politicians. Many times you hear that civil society actors should be watchdogs and put pressure, And of course, we need to put pressure on politicians and other actors, but we also need dialogue. And I think we could also define our mission as being guide dogs for other actors within the society going in, because the only way that we can manage this situation is that we do this together.
So both pushing and facilitating.
Pushing, and offering arenas for dialogue and creating new common, because we get back to the common good, not different interests from different organizations or businesses. We need to create something that is for the common good.
Thank you. Annika, the Churches of Sweden.
Yes, we have a responsibility and a possibility to speak up. One of the Bishop of Stockholm was just at COP27, together with a couple of colleagues, not a big delegation, but a couple of colleagues, to support other Christian movements and other interfaith movements in advocating for climate justice and for gender justice at the negotiation. So I think that church leaders have an opportunity and perhaps even a duty to do that. We have our Archbishop just retired, and the new one hasn't started yet. But so that's an opportunity. But we're all present all across the country, all over the local at the local level as well. And we drive plenty of cars, and driving around to choir rehearsals and to church services and to tending the churchyards, etc. So we can act as leaders in showing the way, in showing that it's possible to use that, electrified vehicles, or to putting up charging stations, etc. And because we heard that knowledge will only take you so far, and you have to have strong values, but unless you do, that's only one factor. But if we can lead the way in helping, we also need to be led by others, but we can certainly be helped. I think there could also be a leadership in, we both need to recognize our sins, if you like, our shortcomings, but also in the church we talk about being sinners and forgiven. And I think that's important as well, because we can't allow ourselves to become paralyzed by the guilt. We need to be open and know the guilt, but we need to be liberated to action, if you like. So we can't let ourselves be paralyzed. And I think in everyday, I mean, it's very, I can certainly recognize my shortcomings and feel a lot of guilt about it. But we can all support each other in, okay, none of us is perfect, but we still need to try and do that together. So let's not just bang each other in the head for being imperfect, but support each other in the action. We also have plenty of arenas. We work together with other civil society organizations. We work with companies. So we need to join forces and team up with partners for climate leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Naghmeh, and then we open for some questions. Yes. How do you shoulder leadership as a political scientist in this field of climate research?
Well, one thing is through our education. I think more and more universities are opening up these interdisciplinary programs where students from different backgrounds can come together and discuss how to solve common problems. So I think that's one step in the right direction. But also internally, I think universities are a microcosm of the thing that you described. So at SU, we do have a management that's very concerned about these issues and have signed declarations, but the governance is very decentralized. And so decision making is spread around the university, and not all are taking action. So I think you need both top-down leadership, but also bottom-up leadership with different actors doing their bit and trying to inspire others and find followers. Because if you're a leader, you also need to be listened to. So finding the followers, I think, is very important. So yeah, my final reflection is I would like to hear from you what your future research will look at.
We'll give the floor to Sverker in a while, but we have some questions from the chat and a few, quite many here. So please direct your questions to one person in the panel and no speeches. Judith.
Yes, we have
Someone
a
from the chat.
question from Linnea Axelsson in the chat, and she's asking Mattias, how do you think the climate bonus, which has now been removed, will affect the electric cars industry and people's buying behavior?
Thank you. We can collect a few questions so you can think about the answers. Meanwhile, we had here in the middle. Okay.
Hi, my name is Enki. I'm a course coordinator at CMS and a student of environmental history. I can't decide who I want to answer this question, so maybe you can decide amongst yourselves. I wanted to ask about levels of political action and political leadership. The more global you get, the more complex it becomes. The more local you get, it can be more direct and more effective, but also it's smaller. So where do you think what scale of political action do you think will be the most effective, and how can we cultivate it?
Thank you. Maybe that's for Naghmeh and others. We have one. Yes.
Yes. I have a question for Mattias. When will Volvo stop selling fossil fuel cars? Or will you continue to spank your children until other parents stop doing so?
Okay.
And also a question for a Swedish church. When will the Swedish church stop clear cutting your forests? Thank you.
Okay. And then there, you had a question as well. A final one, and you keep notes. Good.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. I have a question for Sverker about recently in the news. We keep hearing about how so many people are having problems with being able to afford food and electric bills. It's not so bad in Sweden, but in other countries it's very bad. In the UK, where I come from, it's very bad. And this seems to be a taxless tax. So you talk about that the government needs to put tax on these things, but maybe this is happening by default. And I think that this is something very important to bring into the discussion, that this is a current event that's happening. And is there an argument that it should somehow continue internationally, that people are doing something to benefit the environment because they can't afford not to, which is kind of the same thing as putting a tax on it.
Thank you.
It's a sort of twofold question. My other question is to
a brief
Annika,
one then.
if that's okay.
Yes.
Where I'm very interested in community growing, community gardens, and the Church of Sweden has so much land. I'm very interested to know if the Church of Sweden has any plans to put some of that land over to community growing projects, because I think that would be a really positive thing for the future. And I think also we've talked about...
Okay, we need to give them time to answer. I think your question is clear. Okay. So thanks. Let us start with Mattias' 2 questions, and then we had 2 questions to the Church of Sweden, and then we have this level question, perhaps to Eva and Naghmeh. Mattias.
Yes, the climate bonus, that's I guess, the tax incentive or the incentive in Sweden to buy either fully electrified cars or hybrid cars, for those of you who didn't catch that. And well, I guess in the short term, it will affect the buying behavior. It did affect the buying behavior for 18 hours from when this was announced until when it was going to be pulled away, where we had a mass almost invasion of interested car buyers coming to our stores to buy full electrified vehicles before this sort of time limit was, I think, midnight, almost like Cinderella. But anyhow, we think that, let me take it this way then, we don't think it will be in the long term. I mean, this is where things are going anyhow. And again, as I said, we see also now other incentive schemes being either changed or adopted or being introduced in various markets. I think the United States is perhaps the most interesting case now, with President Biden's new Inflation Reduction Act or law, as it is now. So it's IRL, I should say. so we follow that, of course. But I guess in the long run, no actor could fully rely on subsidies for their products. So this was, I guess, in the Swedish sense, something to sort of kickstart the market. And we can just sort of, we need to take into account now, of course, that this is being pulled away. And we have taken note that the government has also raised or lowered the taxes on fossil fuels with almost the exact same amount as it would cost to keep the tax incentive for fully electrified vehicles, which is a bit odd, perhaps, I would say. But again, we think it will affect the behavior, the buying behavior in the short term, yes, but not in the long term, because we were sort of, we cannot count on this anyhow. And again, it is such a strong demand for this. So we probably will see this will certainly develop in this direction anyhow in Sweden. In terms of where we will stop to sell fossil cars or ICE, internal combustion engine, as it's called in our sector, we haven't taken a bold decision yet, but I think it will be communicated fairly soon. And I do take note also that we have not invested anything into research in combustion engines as of 2018. I think was the last financial support we gave to Chalmers of all universities to go in this direction. We do not, in terms of our own suppliers, we do not owe any part of our company now developing anything in terms of combustion engines. The last example of this was Volvo Cars in Skövde, which has now been sold off. So, I mean, it's very clear for us that we're moving in the direction of 100% electrification. So I think there will be a open announcement fairly soon on when the sort of final diesel car and or petrol car will leave our premises. But it will probably last a couple of years. But already in Sweden, we sell almost over half of our cars are more or less electrified. And also actually the diesel and petrol cars we produce now are what we call mild hybrid cars. So we have this small electric battery. Even if you buy a diesel car, it is somehow electrified also. So the new cars are it's being phased in or the combustion engines phased out gradually, quicker and quicker, I would say.
Thank you. Annika?
As we speak, the Church Synod is going on at UKK. The Church Synod is if most of you are Swedish speakers, it's kyrkomöte. It's like the Church Parliament with the elected trustees at the national level. And it's going to be a debate on forest management tonight. It was scheduled for this afternoon, but they seem to have a lot of things to debate about. And I think that those debates are mostly broadcast publicly. So if you go onto the website, www.svenskakyrkan.se, and you search for kyrkomötet, on those pages you should be able to find the broadcast of the debate and the decisions. So probably the debate will probably give you some direction. I would also like to add that in all of the 13 dioceses that manage forests and land, they do try and they do work with alternativa skötselmetoder, continuous something.
Continuous cover first.
Yeah. But of course, that's the smaller part of the area. So it's definitely up for debate, but we haven't got a date. We probably have less of a date than Volvo, but do look at the debate. The other question was about community gardens. There are actually a lot of parishes that cultivate gardens or that grow vegetables and flowers together with people in the parish, sometimes as work training. And so they usually sometimes they take it the whole way. So you grow things together and you harvest it and you cook together and you compost things. So there are already a lot of those initiatives around. But just like management is decentralized, so governance is decentralized also in Church of Sweden, all the parishes, there are about over 1,000 parishes and over 600 pastorate, and they are largely they are their own legal units, so they have really high self-government. So we can't just tell everyone to start community gardens, but there are lots of those initiatives, and if you talk to your parish, maybe more will see that there's a lot of interest in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have this very huge question about the levels, and we are on overtime already. So maybe it's a contest now between Eva and Naghmeh who can give the most rapid and brief answer on that, because I want Sverker to give a few comments back before we close. And then we have this mingle, as it's called in English, where you can ask the panelists and Sverker and so on additional questions and so. So brief comment perhaps on the level.
Okay, we'll try to cooperate and both answer the question. I think it's a very good question, but there's not an easy answer to that, of course. The short one would be all levels are important, but I would also like to add to that the global multilateral system is to be worried about right now. So I think we should be glad that we have the Secretary General in Antonio Guterres being so engaged in climate policies. So, and you have a lot of impact from the global level, of course, and some say that the national targets, they're worthless and so forth. And then when you get to the community level, but now we see that we have a lot of possibilities in the municipalities. So all levels, I would say.
Yeah, Naghmeh?
Yes, and I agree. So the Paris Agreement gave most powers to the states. So the state level is the most important, legally speaking, but the state needs the help of the cities, the businesses, the citizens, and international corporations. All levels are important.
So if everybody and all levels are climate leaders, we will have the best outcome. Sverker, over to you. A final comment before we thank the panel and you. Just yes, you can just, you have the microphone.
Do you want a microphone?
Yeah, you can come here.
Thank you. So many clever things have been said, so it's difficult to I can't comment on everything you have said, but I would love to discuss this further, all you have brought up. So I saw I think that both Mattias, Naghmeh, and also Annika, you touched upon one thing that I think is interesting, and that's sort of what can really the political sphere do, and how vulnerable is it for basically what Mattias said, that politics is now behind what is going on sort of out in the real world, and I think that's probably correct, and that's my own observation too, that currently politics is not aware of what is actually all the progress taking place, not only in car industry but in many industries, and you talked about guilt, and that is not a very useful feeling.
Well, but not to bring direction forward, perhaps.
Yeah. And I think that many of these things actually boil down to the kind of leadership that I didn't say anything about, which is individual leadership. So we have sort of a tendency that people feel a lot of guilt related to climate change, and then they don't want to fly, and they do various things as consumers. And a lot of focus on the individual is on their individual consumption. And I think that can really give birth to guilt senses. But we as individuals have two functions in society, both as consumers, but also as citizens. And I would feel much more guilt myself if I didn't use my individual leadership as citizens than as consumers. Because relating to the collective action problem again, my contribution to the problem is always so minimal that unless many others change behavior, it's pretty pointless for me to change behavior. But as a citizen, I have so many more tools where I can affect others' behavior too, via politics. So I would feel more guilty if I didn't act as a full political citizen. Which relates also to something that you didn't bring up, Annika, in regard to the church, but that was brought up in the audience here about whether I should continue punishing my children or whatever it was, or hitting them. I think the church, maybe the most powerful way that the church can contribute to behavioral changes is through your capacity of changing social norms, which I didn't bring up on the list, but it's coming close to the strength of effectiveness and fairness. So it's the only sort of what would we call it? Non sort of political or non. Well, it's an informal policy instrument that is not created intentionally necessarily, but that once it's changing has enormous impact on behavior. And there, I think the church can really be maybe the one that can take most leadership almost. Do I have some more time? Just a little. So when it comes to co-creation of knowledge, I totally agree. I think that's super important. What I lack today, especially coming from a university which is far away from Stockholm, is that we have very few platforms where we can co-create together. It's basically impossible to get decision makers to come to Gothenburg, to have a dialogue where we can get information on what kind of knowledge do you need, but also for us to present our knowledge to decision makers. And I don't know how to overcome that, really.
But you're in Uppsala now. It's much
but I'm in Uppsala. But still, I think it's much tougher for Uppsala compared to being in the middle of Stockholm. Regarding affordance, and yes, I really think that the increasing prices on energy, on fuels, on food is an excellent steering instrument for changing behavior. But it's painful, and therefore these increases need to be compensated for, but not by reducing the price on energy, on fuels, but ideally on lower the price on food. So a household budget will be in total will be affected by these price increases. At the same time, from an environmental view, we want these prices to increase because that will fasten the behavioral change. But then we need to compensate for the household economic consequences, not the consequences for gasoline or for energy necessarily. You can compensate other parts of the household budget. For example, by removing all fossil fuel subsidies in the world, where some countries actually use 20% of their GDP on directly or indirectly subsidizing fossil fuels, instead of using that for lower food prices, lower education prices, investing in healthcare and so forth. So yeah, it doesn't have to be that expensive for the household. It depends on which food you mean.
There's an excellent topic for discussing after we round off this, I think now, if possible, Sverker, because we are 10 minutes behind schedule. So, I'm sorry for that, not you, shouldn't be. So let's thank our panelists and Sverker for the lecture. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for listening as well.